Welcome to Ashoka Live, to Welcome Change, our weekly news hour where you get to hear insights and takes from our fellows on what is happening in the world. My name is Constanze Frischen, and I am joined today by Hadi El Khatib. Welcome, Hadi. Nice to have you here online with us. Hadi, you are the founder of the Syrian Archive at Mnemonic. You're joining us from Berlin in Germany, and we'll be talking about your work over the next roughly 30 minutes. First, the two of us, and then for the audience, you are welcome to join us for a Q&A after roughly 50 minutes, and just put in the respective button at the end, at the lower end of your Zoom screen. Just put in the questions, and once the clock hits 20 past, more or less, we're gonna start looking at them. All right, Hadi, thanks again to be here today, talking to us about your work. What you do in a nutshell. Thank you so much. What you do in a nutshell, I was thinking, how could I sort of summarize your work to my friends? And I came up with a sentence that you verify and save images and videos that show potential human rights violations, and you ensure that prosecutors and journalists can use them later on to investigate crimes against humanity. And so we'll be talking about technology, social media platforms, content moderation, this intersection between justice and accountability. But I was thinking we should start probably with the why about your work, how it came about. And I read that there was a saying that played a role when you grew up, that was your family saying, watch out, even the walls might have ears. So perhaps let's start there. And tell us a little bit about how this came about.
Absolutely. So I come from Hama, which is a city in the north of Damascus in Syria. I originally come from there, where the first uprising against the Syrian government happened in 1982. And this is when thousands of people died because they were protesting, and the military, the Syrian military went to the city, destroyed a big part of it, and killed also thousands of people there. And unfortunately, what happened at that also event, there was very little documentation into what happened. So when I was growing up, and when I was, for example, when I would hear about this incident with my family, they would speak with a very low voice. Sometimes they would avoid discussion about it when I asked them about it. And then they would say this, exactly what you've said, that we can't really speak about this, that the walls really, the walls had ears, they can listen to us, and we will be prosecuted if anyone would hear us talking about the events that happened there, or about our opinion of what happened there, and the people that were died at that event. So that was the first uprising that happened in 1982. Which I grew up with, and with very little documentation about what happened in that big event. But what happened in 2011 was very different. It was the second big uprising against the Syrian government. But we've seen from the very first days a huge scale of audiovisual documentation, videos and photos captured by people witnessing the peaceful protests first that were happening, and then also witnessing the violence against protesters. And as years went by, also the violence against protesters on a very large scale, publishing that on social media also on a very large scale. So we
And
have
perhaps
seen a very different.
let me ask you a question there. So you say people publish it on social media on a very large scale. So explain a little bit more why that then still makes your work required or necessary, because one could assume, well, it's all out there, so why do I need someone who archives?
That's a very good question. Because as I have been monitoring what's happening through social media from March 2011 until I founded the Syria Archive in 2014, I've seen how this media was very relevant for many different purposes. It was really useful to media outlets to understand what's happening in Syria. It was really important for human rights organizations to also report about the violence that was happening in Syria. But at the same time, I was seeing how this media was getting lost. So over the years between 2011 and 2014 and until now, this media is being lost because of many different reasons. One of the reasons it's being uploaded on social media platforms, and because of content moderation policies of these platforms, this media is being taken down on a very large scale, especially after 2017, when social media companies started to use machine learning in order to detect this content automatically. So this is why.
So that means, for instance, that there are algorithms that we don't know of exactly how they work, but we can probably deduce there's something like dead bodies, violent images, and it gets removed automatically.
Exactly. So images that show violence, but also images that doesn't show violence coming from Syria. We've seen in 2017 that hundreds of thousands of it was being removed from YouTube specifically because they started to use machine learning to detect this content automatically. And then this content was removed, and a huge percentage of this content is still removed until this moment. So this is why the archiving work.
Why do you think it gets removed?
So it gets removed because the machine learning algorithm that they have developed doesn't really differentiate between a video that show extremist content, graphic content, and between a video that documents a human rights violation content. And that's why those videos are detected automatically, and then they are being removed based on the policy of social media platforms.
So probably something that is well-intended here, we don't want to show graphic content, leads to removal of vital evidence. And it seems to allude to, the fact that just the complexity of what is happening cannot be solved by machine learning.
Exactly. I think, as you have mentioned, the use of machine learning is very dangerous for human rights documentation, not just in Syria, but also around the world, because we've seen how it's really harmed human rights documentation. Again, not just in Syria, around the world, because this is what we see from our work globally with mnemonic.
Let's park this and come back to it a little later. So let's look at then what you do. So this is the moment you come in with verifying and archiving, right? I was reading you have verified last year from Syria alone over, I think, 3.5 million records of digital content. So perhaps let's focus on that for a bit. How do you verify that? And do you use machine learning again, or is this all manually?
So this is constant is what we have archived. We've archived these number of records. which is, as you said, is 3.5 million records overall. And these records contain information from the web, from social media platforms, from certain websites, from certain communication platforms such as Telegram and so on.
Yeah.
And we do it in a way that provides availability, accessibility, and authenticity. But then a very small amount of that, Constance, is really verified, because verification is a very much like a manual process where we really need to be able to first find the relevant content within this large scale of media. And then once we find it, we need to be able to verify its location, date, time. We need to be able to also verify any kind of objects that we can see in the video. And then we need to make sure that we are able to link it with other pieces of media that we have archived, and also link it to other type of evidence in order for it to be used as an incident, in order to construct an incident from the media that we have verified. So when it comes to the use of machine learning that you have mentioned, this is a way that we are using to help us discover what we have in the archive, because contrary to what happened in 1982, where we didn't have any documentation of what happened in Hama, right now we are in 2021, we have millions of images and videos, but it's really hard for us to really find the relevant information for it, in order to prioritize it for researchers, in order to make sure that it's been used for current legal processes, current advocacy campaigns, current human rights reporting. So this is part of the work that with Mnemonic we are trying to do in collaboration with other groups as well.
And that's so interesting, because there is a theme there that says like machine learning is great for analyzing large data sets, but then, so as you say, so there's the manual work, right? The human intelligence and the judgment and the deep knowledge of history, politics, the region that comes in and complements that.
Exactly. This is really vital, Constance, for verification. Is the context knowledge is really important. The language knowledge is really important. The historical knowledge of the country is really important, because this would make the verification process very easier to find content on social media, to ask also people in country for relevant content that complement the open source documentation that is gathered. And this is all a manual process where researchers would need to use certain tools and techniques to verify location, date, time of every piece of record, and make sure that it's clustered together in incidents, and then those incidents also clustered together in collections, because also part of what we do with Mnemonic is not just verifying a video or verifying an incident, but also from a bigger picture understanding the pattern of violence for certain types, and why it happened, and what is the impact of it for the people that are actually facing this violence.
Yeah. And you mentioned impact. You have had pretty spectacular impact with your work by feeding the results of your investigations on to governments, to prosecutors. Tell us a little bit about that.
So this was really the core mission of the Syrian Archive, is to make sure that we archive media as fast as possible, to of course make sure that it's available in the future, because we realize that any legal accountability is going to take a long time. But also we really wanted to make sure that it feeds to current processes and that we push for current processes to happen. And one of the main cases that we are working on legally is the use of chemical weapons in Syria. And we focused on 2 incidents in 2 locations in Syria, in Eastern Ghouta and in Khan Sheikhoun, which are the biggest use of chemical weapons, specifically sarin, in recent history. We submitted the legal complaint to the German prosecutor, to the French prosecutor, as well as with the Swedish prosecutor, in collaboration with the Syrian Center for Freedom of Expression and with the Open Society Justice Initiative. And big part of that submission also was media that is verified and collected by the Syrian archive. And this is exactly how we want to make sure that this material is used, is to feed into these processes, make sure that the people who risk their lives to take these materials and captured it, to witness, to show to the world what they are witnessing, is delivered also to governments that are able to use it for accountability purposes. This is really important for us, this link, and that we continue working on this, not just for legal purposes, but also to keep informing the media about what's happening, to keep informing human rights organizations about what's happening, and to make sure that whatever we archive is going to be part of truth building in the future of the country, and part of its transitional justice, hopefully, in the future.
Very powerfully said. And what happened, or where are these investigations right now that you mentioned?
So the current status of these legal complaints is that the 3 countries, Germany, France, and Sweden, open investigations about the use of chemical weapons in Syria in these 2 incidents, which is something that is very good for us. It's very good for the accountability process when it comes to these crimes. And this is where the status right now with these investigations.
Yeah. I was just wondering, as I was listening to you, about what you said earlier, that machines remove content almost automatically, violent content. Have you seen that this also opens up windows of opportunity for, let's say, the Syrian government to then flood social media with other images and thus take over news feeds?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've seen during the last 10 years of us working on Syria, many disinformation, propaganda about what's happening from all sides of the conflict. So we've seen images and videos published by governments, published by non-governmental groups, that they are sharing propaganda about what happened at certain events, or propaganda about certain groups that they are doing rescue missions or doing humanitarian work. And our role within this disinformation environment is to counter this disinformation by archiving, collecting, and verifying visual materials to reconstruct really what happened, and to make sure that this reconstruction is based on facts. And this is our answer to the disinformation that is being really published by everyone. And not just that, but also make sure that how we are doing this work is transparent, including the methodologies, including the tools that we are working on. And this is really a very important part of our mission, countering disinformation by reconstructing the narrative based on facts, narrative that we also own through archiving.
Mm-hmm. How are social media, the big social media companies, responding to that? Do you see them as collaborative or as distant?
So, I mean, from what we have seen from the recent leaks, for example, that was published on Facebook, we as civil society organization, Syrian Archive, including many other organizations working on this in many different countries, not just in Syria, who have been engaging with social media companies and asking social media companies about paying more attention, investing more resources into this issue. Nothing really has been changed. The use of machine learning is still happening. A huge amount of content related to human rights documentation is still being removed by social media companies, not just in Syria, but also in other countries. There has been absolutely engagement and collaboration throughout the years, especially since 2017 with YouTube, in order to reinstate some of the channels that has been removed. And we have worked with them to reinstate hundreds of thousands of videos that has been published by credible human rights organizations in Syria. Credible media outlets have been working for the last 10 years. So it's not any propaganda groups. And this happened, but unfortunately, still a big part of this documentation is removed, which means this can be a really critical evidence that also could be used in criminal investigations and legal complaints that we are working on, as well as advocacy campaigns and human rights reports. So unfortunately, we see that the situation haven't changed, especially after we see the leaks, after we see that social media companies know exactly about this problem. And despite that, they are continuing the use of machine learning, even though it's just erasing the history and memory of people around the world.
Thank you so much, Hadi. This is very powerful. There are many questions coming in already in the chat, so I'm scanning here, and one is about the power of social media companies to remove data. It sheds light on the issue that data is beyond our control once we post it on social media.
Exactly.
And so that is what the question here is alluding to. How do you save videos and images, and do you use blockchain? Blockchain being a means where you cannot remove things, where you distribute, where you save data on a distributed public ledger.
So in terms of owning the data, this is a really important point, because when we work with journalists, photographers, citizens from around the world, and when we ask them about the idea of archiving the data, lots of people, they think of social media as a place where they are archiving actually their materials. So they think we have the archive, it's on social media, we have the archive, it's on Dropbox or it's on Google Drive. So this is a very good point, that actually when this media is uploaded on social media platforms, we are losing control of this data. And this is why we, at the Syrian Archive in 2014, started as a core mission archiving these materials. And then when we were archiving these materials, we also really wanted to make sure that this material is archived to provide long-term accessibility, to make sure it's available in the future, to make sure that we archive it in a way that it's safe, and to make sure that we archive it in a way that is authenticated. So we need to give proof that we haven't tampered with the material since we have collected it. So we started to think with the years about what are the actual criteria that we need to make sure that we do when archiving those materials. And this is how we move forward with our development of our technical tools that archive those materials. And when it comes to the use of blockchain, this is something that we are collaborating with a company, a partner called Inigio. So this is how we are doing with them timestamping of the data that we are archiving through their blockchain technology. In order just to add another proof that we have these timestamps from a third-party organization to make sure that we have the timestamps from the time we've collected the data and that this data hasn't been tampered with through the proof that we can provide with these timestamps. So this is how we are doing it so far.
Yeah, really interesting. So one follow-up question here from the Q&A that also fits with that. So how do you see the future of Web3, which you know, is the go-to name for a future where data is stored safe, decentrally, and thus, how do you see the potential for, you know, the methodology behind your work to be used for all kinds of situations where people want to document injustices, be it environmental injustices or human rights abuses? What do you say to that?
So in 2018, Constance, we created Mnemonic, which is a Berlin-based organization that effectively use digital documentation and support groups to effectively feed it into accountability processes as well as advocacy and transitional justice. And we did this because of requests that we have got from different groups in different countries, such as Yemen, where we created the Yemeni Archive 2018, and Sudan, where we created the Sudanese Archive in 2019 after the protests. As we have been doing this work since 2014, we see first that in countries where we are working, conflict countries where people are facing repression, dictators are learning from each other about how to repress people and how to silence them, how to commit war crimes, and how to not be accountable for that. And for example, what we see right now, the situation in Sudan and the military coup is very similar to what's happened in Egypt. This is very dangerous because this would be very challenging for investigations about what's happening in these countries. So then we see that accessibility to these countries will be very limited. International organizations and UN agencies and international journalists will be very difficult for them to do investigations in this country. Accessibility would be a very, very big problem. So the use of
for citizens to start videotaping and to start documenting.
Exactly. So this is what we are going to be seeing more and more with the technology that is available right now.
Yeah, there is a key question, Asif, on the chat just related to that. Someone's asking, how could we archive videos of violations before they are being taken down by the website? So what should people do when they have evidence in their hands? How do they save it and store it safely?
So this is what we do as part of our monitoring process. And we do monitoring in many different ways. And what I mean, monitoring the videos and photos being published on social media platforms, documenting human rights violations. So we do monitoring of specific sources that we know that they are publishing content. We do monitoring based on certain keywords of current events that are happening or historical events that happened in the past. And once we do that, and once we discover content, we make sure that we preserve it automatically as fast as possible. And this is always our priority. Once we do that, we know that it's going to take us time in order to verify these materials, but at least our priority is that this materials is archived and that we would have the time in order to verify it later on. And how to do that technically? There are different tools that are available online to do this. Some of it meets some kind of a standard that I have mentioned before when it comes to preserving contents with the criteria that I have mentioned, and some of it just preserve material without really considering these standards, but are also free tools that are available if people want to use it, not really thinking about legal accountability when collecting these materials.
Yeah. There is another question here. I'm conscious we are on time, but it's an important question. So let me pose it to you. How do you tend to the well-being of the humans involved and gathering and triaging violent and traumatic content?
This is a very important question, and with mnemonic and at the beginning also with the Syrian archive, this is a big issue that we really need to be taking care of. So we as researchers looking at this content, we need to make sure that there is a system and there is support for all researchers for their well-being, and that there is a kind of a very practical assistance from a psychologist that would work with the researchers in order to understand all the challenges and mitigate some of these challenges also during this work. So setting up protocols and making sure that researchers have accessibility and experts that would work with them on the well-being is very important. Some other also mitigations to this can be technical. For example, part of the work that we are doing on machine learning is to make sure that images at the beginning are blurred, so the researchers are not seeing graphic images directly on their screen. And this is something that we want to do more work on in order to mitigate these really hard scenes. But we realize that this is really important, and it's something that we have best practices for researchers, and we are trying more and more to improve on how we provide this support and how to make sure that we are attentive to it.
Thank you, Hadi. That ties into a last question here. What gives you hope?
I mean, absolutely what gives me hope and motivation is the will of people that are facing firsthand the violence or the families of victims that still didn't really get their accountability, whether in Syria, whether in other countries, but are still fighting for it and are still asking for it. And I think this is really what gives me hope, that working together with them and making sure that we add value to any documentation that is taking, to use it in different ways to make sure that it's actually used for justice and accountability and used to reconstruct the future of the country again is very important for us. And it's really what gives me, it's really what gives us hope and motivation.
Thank you so much, Hadi. And with this, we've reached the end of our time. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. We're going to send out the digest of the core of what you shared with us today to participants later on. We'll be up next on December 8th with Ashoka Fellows Jennifer Bailey and Angelo Esselio, who will talk about how to maintain hope through difficult times. And with that, I'm wishing everyone a good rest of the day. And thank you again, Hadi, for your important work. Everyone can check out mnemonic.org to find more information. And we'll keep following your work and updating everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.